Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Unsecurity Podcast. I'm your host, Oscar Minks, joined by the always wonderful Brad Nye. Hey, Brad, how's it going, man?
It's cold, sleety, turning to snow, so it's gross out. But other than that, doing well.
What do you mean, man? It's going great. It's March Madness.
Oh,
Come on.
yeah, we're recording this after the first two games, and man, those were some phenomenal games.
Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't had time to really dig in and watch, but I'd be lying if I said right now that I don't have hoops on right behind my camera. So I'll be looking very closely in the camera as we do this, and yeah, catching some hoops action right now. Alabama's on, and
Yeah,
playing Texas A&M, Corpus Christi. I bet this is going to be a blowout, but what do I know? Every year it's like, we're doing a company bracket, and I talked
yep,
to a couple people, and they're like, I don't know, I just don't really know much about basketball, and that's like, yeah, but the people who always win don't ever know anything about
yep,
basketball. So
yep.
your chances are just as good as mine. Every year I'm like, yeah, I kind of know the teams this year. I got a good idea. I feel confident about my bracket. And then after day one, my bracket's always busted.
Yep. It's why it's called March Madness.
Yeah. Yeah. Seth, who, one of our guys on the red team does some R&D work for us. He said, I'm trying to think of how he phrased this, but he's like, I just root for chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And so just like rooting for the upsets, I love that. And that's my favorite part about March Madness is getting to see
Yeah,
the upsets. And as long as it's not my team, which
right.
happened last year. So karma's on our side this year. I think we're going to get a couple wins in here at least. Hopefully make a run.
We'll see.
Yeah. So who's your team, Brad? I know we were just talking about it, but
Yeah,
who'd you
I have
pick?
Texas. I have Texas winning the whole thing.
All right. Yeah. Big 12's been tough this year. So we'll see how that shakes down.
Look good,
It
but again,
pained me to
what do I
do
know?
it. It really did pain me to do it, but I picked Kansas to win the whole thing. I don't want Kansas to win it all. I want the Cats to, but every year I pick the Cats to win it all, and um, hasn't shook down for me in a few years. That's okay. So this year I actually said I'm going to try to win the bracket instead of just being a homer.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, that's the problem is getting your personal biases in there.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, it's hard not to. It's hard for me as a fan, like a diehard fan, to not pick my team. Um, Still going to be rooting for them. That's all that
Yep.
counts. Yeah. Yeah. So what's been going on, man, in the security world for you? Anything exciting?
I, VRM.
Yeah,
It's crazy
VRM.
how it's crazy regulation makes people do the stuff that we've been preaching for 3.5 years.
It's fantastic. It's great. It's
I
been hard
mean,
on you. You're doing a lot of work right now,
yeah,
but it's like, yeah, this is something we were screaming about years ago, and it's good to
glad they're
see
doing
the
it.
yeah the market start to catch up. I can say also, even besides the engagements we're doing for people, like the uptick of our clients engaging us, we've seen a significant
Mhm.
increase, and so it's all around good. It's fantastic.
Yep. Yeah, do what's right. Use
Apologies
our
if I have a
support.
little cough here and there. I'm dealing with a cold today, so I'm going to do my best not to cough into the microphone like I just did anymore. Try my best to hit that mute button. Yeah, so how about news, man? You got any hot news for us?
Yeah, couple things. First, there was a Adobe ColdFusion 0-day bug being exploited in the wild. Low technical complexity without user interaction. So if you're using what is it, ColdFusion update to ColdFusion 2018 update 16 and ColdFusion 2021 update 6. Uh, Older versions of ColdFusion are still vulnerable. So 2000 ColdFusion 11 and ColdFusion 2016. So if you're on those, get off of them and upgrade to the latest one as quickly as possible.
And so 2021 is the latest version of Cold Fusion, right?
Yep.
And so the
Yeah.
patches are out for that
Yep.
now. Good.
So if you're running ColdFusion, get it patched because the
Yeah.
um, they're saying get this done within 72 hours if practicable.
Yeah, and so just so everybody knows, our listeners, like, here's the way this works. It's the way it works every time. Attackers are right now scouring data sets to see how many assets have been identified in the wild as running Cold Fusion. They're also going to be scanning assets, mass scanning assets to identify those that are utilizing Cold Fusion. And then we're going to see what we call a spray and pray attack. next, right?
Mm-hmm.
So once they have their targets, the exploit is in the wild right now. I haven't seen the POC yet. I bet we could dig it up. And they'll just be essentially trying to exploit that POC to gain access to your systems. Um, a couple things to understand there. Again, in these spray and pray attacks, just because you don't see any anomalies doesn't mean you aren't affected. Typically, what happens in this case is if this is a remote code execution, which will likely give them the ability to execute malware on the back end, drop a shell on the back end, something to give them persistent access into your network or into your system.
Yep.
And so they'll essentially launch that attack to all vulnerable systems, drop those shells like crazy. They're likely not going to move to like secondary and tertiary phases of the attack right away. They're going to see
Nope.
how many systems they can gain access to, see what their most valuable targets are, who's got
Mm-hmm.
the highest value, and then they'll start circling back to either launch those secondary attacks to try to get in the network, exfiltrate data, ultimately ransom, or also sell that access to other threat actors to essentially begin
Yep.
their methodology and TTPs to complete pwnage. So
Yeah.
if you have those systems patched, but also you need to hunt on those systems right away to see if there has been any evidence of remote code execution. Look for creation of new files, modification of files, modification of cron jobs, scheduled tasks, and so on to try to identify those persistence mechanisms. And as always, too, if you don't have the skill set to do that, hopefully you got a good partner that can help you with those things. Give them a call. It'll be
Yeah.
worth it to do some hunt. Spend the time now. So it's like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Now's the
Yeah.
time to use that ounce of prevention.
The one of the researchers, one of the two that found it, his quote to try and pound home how urgent this is he says, "I've personally seen both arbitrary code execution and arbitrary file system read vulnerabilities having been perpetrated on multiple servers, and it is grave."
Mm-hmm.
So we need. I mean, this is one you got to take seriously.
Yeah, and I don't know the footprint right now, but I know that ColdFusion is widely adopted, and so there's going to be a large volume of web applications that will be affected by this.
Yeah.
And so that's the scary thing, right? It's always like to me, like there's a lot of these RCs we see, but if they're on products that aren't widely adopted and used, it's not as big of a deal. But in this case, our attack surface is going to be pretty big, and so they're going to be able to cast a pretty wide net. Um, I hope everybody knows that and understands. Like the biggest mistake we see, Brad, right, over and over is like people just patch and they think they're fixed.
Right.
But if you have that window where you were vulnerable and that proof of concept was available and it was being exploited, like patching is not enough. You need to make
Nope.
sure that you're able to hunt that
Validate
system
you haven't
properly.
been, already
Yep.
compromised.
Yep. And so one thing, like a technique, like maybe to talk about for people is timelining. I don't know if a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people understand what timelining is. But it's very, very valuable in this type of exercise. So if you're doing threat hunting, um, the Windows system, for example, has MFT, and the MFT file is essentially going to log all modifications, all access, creation, and births of files on that system in a timeline, right? So you can see
Mm-hmm.
exactly the date and the time that those things happen. And so in this case, what you would want to be doing is hunting that server. I would be looking for creation files and birth
Yep.
files, so the C's and B's in there, to see if you've had any C's or B's that appear in the timeline in the last few days. And if you have, now there will be valid stuff in there. Windows is quite noisy, right? And so you
Mm-hmm.
see, like with staging patches and things like that, it's constantly creating new files. But look and see if you see any files that are out of the norm, right?
Yep.
Look specifically in your web directories where ColdFusion is running and where that root location of the web service is. See if there's been any new files created there. Don't limit your hunt to there, but it's a good place to start.
Yeah. Another good one is Windows temp.
Yeah, Windows temp. If they have access to pivot to there, always check for that. Also, too, like a thing to be concerned about is like making sure that your service isn't running as an administrator. And we see that a lot as well. So
Yeah.
understand what access on the system that your web service hosting ColdFusion actually has on that system, and think about all the places that account could get if they were able to get a shell connection into the box. They'll
Yeah.
essentially be running that shell as that context user or service account that's running your application hosting. And so I
Yeah.
think we have a really good article up on the FRSecure blog about how to do a timeline. So if I'm talking Greek to you right now, go hit our blog and look for the timelining article that I think Corey Hanks wrote. He did a fantastic job. And we give you a lot of the tools and teach you those methods so you can run those things yourself. You may not understand what the hell you're looking at when you get through, but give it a try. If you don't, give us a call and we'll help you out.
Yeah. Getting through that timelining the first couple of times is a little bit tough because you're, not sure exactly what you're looking for. But once you kind of understand and know what you're looking for, files that are 8 characters that are random letters, and there's things you start seeing and going, oh, that doesn't look right.
Yeah. It's like we always say, right? No normal, find evil.
Yep.
And so when you start seeing those things that just don't really make sense, that warrants an extra investigation to try to figure out what the heck that is and validate those files. And if not, they should be there.
Yeah. And don't click it if you think it's bad.
Yeah, do not. Don't run it. Throw it in a lab environment and try to interact with it in an isolated machine with no network connectivity in your lab, because you all have a lab and a sandbox to do that stuff, right? If you don't, build one right now. It's easy.
Right.
You can do it. Yeah, cool. So speaking of those lines, you were telling me about another one, right? Like the United States federal agency was breached.
Yes, I didn't see where it was or who it was, but between November of 22 and the beginning of January of 23, breached the U.S. federal agency Telerik vulnerability. So it's a web server plugin that had been known since 2019. What they're doing is getting access to the web server, dropping malicious DLLs into Windows temp, like we just said.
Yep.
And it's interesting because the reverse engineering of the DLL files and the W3WP process of the web server, the web server process doesn't execute any other malicious processes or sub-processes. So it's going to try and keep it under the radar a little bit. Hang on one second. I got a call coming in because that, of course, happens.
Perfect timing. I got one just now, too, and I had to ignore it. Yeah, so I wonder, you guys will probably have listeners right now that can't see Brad, but I can see him, and it looks like a very serious phone call. And now he's back.
Sorry. It was my wife. She called once, and then I didn't answer it, and she called back again. I'm like, so all good.
Yeah. So one thing I think you were talking about, the interesting thing, they're actually DLLs, right, that were masqueraded as PNGs. So it looked like a PNG, but if you actually dissect the file, you see it's a DLL. And the DLLs were gaining system information, loading additional libraries, enumerating files and processes, and essentially doing exfiltration as well, right?
Yeah, I like the names of some of the IOCs. So this is kind of the thing you're going to look for, right? XE reverse shell.exe, multi-OS reverse shell.exe.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's most likely not what you want to see.
Right. Or like you see new PNGs, like, because I think some of these techniques are using like a PNG. Why would you have new PNGs created in that root web directory, right?
Yep.
And again, I'm looking at this attack. It's just what we were talking about before. Some of those DLLs are just reverse shells. And that's usually when you got a web application that's public facing, your first exploit, when you gain access, your first goal is to gain persistent access, and that's what those shell files do, right? So for anybody that doesn't understand, essentially we're putting a file in your root web directory that I know exists, and I can access that file to gain command line access to your system. And then once I have that command line access to your system, well, it's just bad news. And essentially, like going back to what I said before, why it's really important to understand what account you're running your web applications under. Make sure if it is a service account, it's a properly secured service account, so it doesn't have user rights, doesn't have elevated privileges, and so on. Because we see a lot of times where maybe like IS is running as a straight up admin, and that's real
it works
bad.
that way though.
It does work. Yeah, easy of use. Yeah, this one too is just, like the same old narrative. I feel like we beat a dead horse on here a lot, but it's like vulnerability is 4 years old right now.
Yeah.
4 years old. And so, but here's the caveat. I will say this. We know that's the vulnerability that led to the breach. But what I can't say for sure is when and if that vulnerability was patched, because the logic and the attack chain, like I was talking about before, that could have been compromised back in 2020, and the attackers had a persistent shell that our government agency was unaware of for 3 years, and they come back around
Right.
and use that shell to exfiltrate
Yep.
data. And
Right.
so again, like the importance of like don't just patch and think you're good ever when it comes to publicly available assets and a remote code execution vulnerability, because a lot of people get bit by that, and
Yep.
I hate to see that happen.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. So kind of along that lines, like there was another idea I wanted to talk about with you, and something we're seeing. Like uh, I've seen some other public sources start reporting on this last year, and we're starting to see some of our APTs, uh, our advanced persistent threat groups, are starting to change some methods, and it's
Hmm.
really interesting. We're essentially, we've always known that ransomware involves an encryptor, right?
Right.
We know there's more government crackdowns, right? So our governments worldwide are starting to really crack down on those APTs that execute destructive methods, right?
Right.
So think about like I think Colonial was the big thing that got this whole ball rolling, right?
Yeah.
Seeing some attacks on healthcare, right? And so we're getting more deliberate about trying to target those groups.
And they've been
And
successful.
well, I'm sorry.
They've been successful in shutting down several big name groups
Right. Yeah,
recently
I
too.
think so. And like we've talked about though, they've made progress, but it's just whack-a-mole, man. You punch
Oh yeah.
one down and another one pops up over here. They pop up over here with another name, and it's almost like a never-ending cycle. But yeah, we're having some success. I've been happy to see that. But now the method is so attackers are saying like, "Hey, how can we be less destructive? So maybe we're not going to be targeted." And we're starting to see attackers that are saying they're coming in, they're really quiet, they exfiltrate all your data, they sneak out the back door. They leave a couple persistence mechanisms for accessing your environment. Then they get out the back door. They wait a little time so logs roll over and all that stuff. And they come back and they say, hey, guess what? We stole all your data. And if you don't pay us the ransom that we're requesting, we're going to publicly disclose your data or we're going to sell your data, do whatever best, to make our money.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting tactic. And I do think, this may be a way of the future. I don't know what you think,
Yeah.
Brad.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I think they're getting a lot of heat, especially some of these groups are, I mean, not officially government backed, but are clearly government backed,
Hmm.
or at least aided and looking the other way. And
Oh
when you
yeah.
start getting international pressure and it's, you know, Russian or Chinese or North Korean linked, they don't like that negative press either. So I think you're right. I think you'll see
Hmm.
more of a, you know, snatch and run. And hey, by the way,
Right. There's a lot of benefits for the attackers here too. This is
mm-hmm,
what's really interesting to think about. If they are good enough to evade detection during the exfiltration phase, then that tells me our endpoint tools don't have the ability to detect a lot of their methods, right? And we
yeah,
know people are very reliant on endpoint detection tools to be able to identify these attacks for the first phase. And so that's one thing. The second thing is if they're able to get in and out, time this right, guess what? Logs roll over,
yeah,
artifacts disappear,
right,
and our essentially residue, so what we like to call like digital forensic residue. We're hunting a case. A lot of that residue dissolves over time,
right.
and so what that means is these tools, these exploits, and these
We're not
TTPs
gonna
that our
hack
attackers
them.
are using, they're going to be relevant for a much longer time period, right?
Mm-hmm,
Because they're not getting burned as quickly. We
right.
see like even our own stuff, like shelf life is pretty short in that red team world. The shelf life of these exploits and payloads, droppers and beacons, it's pretty short lived. However, if the attackers shift to this model, I think it's going to put a lot more pressure on the blue teamers at being
Yeah,
proactive and really detecting these attacks from non-standard methods within the environment for us to stay ahead to be able to essentially defend against these new payloads and TTPs.
yeah. Well, and as you were talking, I'm like, well, how can we protect against this? And I think this is where your SIM solution comes in. Are you watching IPs that, where is your external traffic going? Is it going? Do you have geo-blocking in? Is it being exfiltrated to the Netherlands? Do you have business in the Netherlands? No. Well,
Yeah.
right. So knowing your normal and watching for those anomalies, that's really the
Yeah.
only way you're going to catch this.
And the reality too, and you're right, that is one detection method, is to look for data traversing your network. That's not
Yeah,
typical data that's leaving your network, but by then it's almost too
they
late,
forgot.
right?
Yeah.
It's too late. And so like it goes back to before, like when we talk about even like basic security, like um, what gets your
Wow.
seam if you're not really tuning that seam internally, right? What are you
Mhm.
monitoring with your seam? And like the one big thing that always is like a commonality in these cases is they compromise an admin account and they use that admin account to pivot throughout the environment.
Mhm.
Now, if you know your patterns of what Bill, the network admin, what systems is he typically interacting with, right?
Right.
On a day-to-day basis, what systems is Bill interacting with? I bet you'll see too, a lot of Bill's system interactions is going to correlate with tickets that are in the system, help desk
Mhm.
tickets, things like that, where he's having a break fix. If you're monitoring all your admin's account activities, and then you suddenly see that Bill interacts with 200 servers in your environment, that's the anomaly, right?
Right. Or
That's the anomaly to
after
say,
hours,
oh, something's wrong, you know?
at 3 a.m. in the morning, and he
Yeah,
never does that.
exactly. Look at the time your users are logging in. Look at anomalous behavior. And that's
Yeah.
why like it's so important when we talk about like normalizing your network, normalizing your seam so you know what is normal. And then if you have
Yeah.
good tools in place, like you will see those anomalies and you'll be able
Yeah.
to react
And,
promptly and hopefully prevent the sort of attack from happening with you
yeah. And
to
I
you.
know, we talk about it like it's easy. I fully understand that's a lot of work to do,
It is.
right? But it takes time. You have to know
Mm-hmm.
your environment inside and out.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, you're never going to get there. So,
Yep.
it's not an overnight thing. It's an ongoing, because you have to watch it and learn what's normal. You have to teach the tools what's normal,
Mm-hmm.
and then it will pay off in the end. It makes life a lot easier when you can go, hey, wait a minute, why did my external bandwidth jump 25 megabit per second for 6 straight hours? It's never
Mm-hmm.
done
Yep.
that.
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
yeah, CPU activity suddenly spikes. Just watching for the anomalies. You got to do it.
Yep. Yep. I agree. That's some of these threat actors too. I think we're seeing like it's kind of funny. Like I'll be honest, like sometimes we kind of talk shit about the threat actors. Like man, these guys they do some dumb stuff. This is why they get caught.
Yeah,
And I think it's almost the natural evolution, right? They're in this to make money, man. One
right.
thing is to make money and make money only. And to me, this is like a natural evolution of that, right? So they're figuring out how can we make more money, and so that's going to like mean that they're going to have to level up their skill sets. They're going to have to
Yeah,
level up in the tools that they're using to evade detection. They're going to have to invest in those things to be able to guarantee that success. And
and you
so,
breaks when you're
you know,
learning that stuff.
take my tinfoil hat off, but also at the same time, like I can't say I didn't expect this. And this is a very interesting technique to see if more attackers kind of adopt this methodology just to stay out of the law enforcement sites.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we know that that's definitely something any criminal wants. Is they want to be out
Hmm.
of out of sight, out of mind.
Right, right. Yeah, so fun stuff, man. We'll have to keep our ears to the ground and see how that all plays out here over the next few months. But I think maybe the words of wisdom for all our listeners at this point is like, so that's what we mean by no normal and find evil, right? So
Mhm.
make sure that you are normalizing your systems, monitoring your account activity, really having a good baseline too of, baseline inventory, like we talk about, know your assets, know what systems exist, know what applications exist on those systems, know where your data and your crown jewels live. So in the event of a response like this, you know quickly what you need to look at first, what you need to secure and isolate first to
Mhm.
try to protect your
Yep.
data.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like I don't even know what episode we're on at this point anymore, but it feels like every episode has been some variation of just do the basics, know your
Hmm.
environment, patch. It's always those things. over and over. That hasn't changed in 20 years.
Well, the reality is, because it's still relevant. It's still
Yeah.
true. It's still going to be relevant. It's still going to be true. So many people just say, how do I buy security? Let me go buy my security right now.
Mm-hmm.
Let me get the tool. Let me put that in place, and that's security. But it's not. And I think we're going to keep saying that. We're going to have to keep saying that, right? It's
At some point,
always
people
doing
will
the
listen.
basics. I think people are starting to listen. I think so. I think our people are listening, and that's great. Um, but I think there's just still a big gap, man, and we're up against big money here,
Yep.
and
Well,
people selling like easy button security, and like, not talking junk about anyone, but a lot of people just don't understand that that's a scam. They don't understand that that's not the
there is,
reality of how
yeah,
this
it's
world
not plug and
works.
play. It,
Right.
yeah, could it help? Sure.
Yeah.
But you still have to tune it and know, again, what's your baseline.
Yeah. And I
That
get
could
asked
have,
that a lot. I'm sure you do too. Like, which tool is better? What do you think about this tool versus this tool? And my answer is like, it's really just any tool's as good as the people who are implementing and
yep,
managing that tool. Period. Now, granted, there are some technical limitations between different tool sets, but at the end of the day, like, it just comes down to like actually properly implementing, properly managing, and monitoring that tool. Period.
yep. Yeah, it's funny. I have two different VCSO clients, two completely different industries. Both industries have been hit hard with big public um, breaches in the last 4 to 6 months, and both suddenly the top level at both sides is like, okay, I don't want to be the next one. What do we do?
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
that's what it takes. Is for years we're not a target. We don't have anything of value. No,
Mm-hmm.
yes you do.
Yeah,
And
it's such a hard place, but sometimes it's like, it's kind of the best medicine for people, right?
yep.
To suffer that incident, to suffer through that, and remember how painful that was, and how bad that was, and how hard financially that was to get
Hmm.
their stuff together afterwards. And I hate that. I hate that it has
Yep.
to come to that, because, like, we know some businesses don't make it through, and that breaks my heart when
Right.
that happens. And so, really, it's just, I think we're pleading like to everyone, right? Let's try to get ahead of this curve, and let's stay ahead of
Yeah.
this curve, because I don't want you to have to suffer like that. But the reality is, I mean, it takes that level,
Yeah.
of an incident or an event for people to truly understand.
That's typically what we say, right? Is
Yeah.
there's two people. There's the ones that have been through it and they're doing
And the ones that
security.
are going to be through it.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And luckily in this case, neither of mine has gone through it, but they've seen closely, like
Hmm.
intimately know the people and have heard and seen what the pain has been. And they're going,
Yep.
oh yeah, okay, no, I do not want that.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
that's the best case is not
Yeah.
having to suffer through it, but
Yep.
understanding it and seeing it firsthand. Because
Yep. I completely
that's
agree.
the way you learn.
Oh yeah, 100%, man. Well, heck yeah, I think we're about to the end of our time here. This has been a fun one, man. Hopefully, everybody gets some value out of this. I know we haven't been on our schedule. It's been crazy busy, and we apologize. We'll try to get back on the rhythm. Thanks for everybody for sticking with us and
Yeah.
tuning in to listen. Before we go, Brad, who you got for shout outs, man? Any shout outs you want to give?
Yeah, I'm gonna give shout out to Sadie and Sarah H, our PMs, for not murdering me over this VVRN stuff. Avalanche them.
Nice. I'm going to give Jeff, our IT manager, a shout out. Jeff is awesome. Hope he listens to this. Dude, like, just works his tail off all the time. Even though he's a Badgers fan, he's always got a great attitude. And he's a great guy. And I think he deserves a little recognition for all the hard work he's doing behind the scenes for us. He really is a superstar.
I would second that. Jeff's
Yep.
awesome.
All right, cool. Well,
All
thanks a
right.
lot. Thanks, Brad, for joining us. Thanks to all our listeners. And we will be back soon. Have a great rest of your day and a great week. See ya.